They were about to pull the plug on a dying baby when a homeless kid nobody noticed walked through the door and did something that had no explanation. Not one. The doctors wrote it down, studied it, argued about it for months, and in the end, they closed their notebooks and said nothing. This is what actually happened. His name was Jace. If you saw him, you would not look twice. 13 years old. Skinny in a way that made his clothes look borrowed. Shoes held together by habit more than material. He moved through the city the way water moves through cracks, low, quiet, finding spaces other things ignored. He had been sleeping near the east side loading dock of Crestfield Medical for 11 days. Not inside. Never inside. The brick wall near the service entrance trapped heat from the building's vents, and if you pressed your back flat against it before midnight, you could sleep without shaking until around 4 in the morning, when the temperature dropped again and woke you like a hand on your throat. Jace knew this because he had tested every wall. He had also tested the dumpster alcove on the north side, the covered bike rack near the pharmacy entrance, and the concrete ledge under the pediatric wing window where a broken gutter dripped but never fully hit you if you stayed left. He was not lost. He was not waiting to be found. He was surviving, which is different. The nurses on the east door knew his face. 2 of them left food sometimes. A sandwich in a paper bag propped against the wall where he slept. No note. No eye contact when they passed him. Just food quietly left, the way you leave water out for something wild that you are afraid to scare away. One nurse, a woman named Petra with short gray hair and reading glasses she kept losing, had told him once to go to the youth shelter on Decatur Street. She had said it the same way people say things they do not believe will happen. Jace had nodded. He had not gone. The shelter had rules about staying in groups, and groups meant other boys, and other boys meant someone always wanting to know your story, and his story was not something he was willing to hand to strangers. His mother had died 14 months ago. His little brother, 2 years old, had died 3 weeks after her. A respiratory infection that started like a cold and became something the doctors said they could not reverse. Jace had sat in a waiting room chair for 9 hours while that happened. Then a social worker had come and explained what would happen next, and Jace had listened carefully, and then he had walked out of the building and not gone back. He did not tell anyone that part. That Thursday, the rain started before noon and did not stop. Jace sat under the pharmacy overhang with his knees pulled to his chest and watched the water run in sheets across the parking lot. His jacket was soaked through. His socks were beyond help. He had 38 cents in his left pocket and nothing in his right. He was not thinking about money. He was watching the entrance doors. He did this sometimes. Not for any reason he could name. He just watched people go in and out. Clean people. Hurrying people. People holding coffee cups and car keys and each other. People who had places and were moving between them without having to think about what came next. He was watching when the black SUV pulled up to the front doors at 12:47, and a man in a gray suit got out without closing the door behind him. Jace noticed the door first. People in expensive suits always closed their doors. This one didn't. That meant his hands were shaking before he even reached the entrance. The man's name was Grant Calloway. Jace did not know that yet. What he knew was that the man moved through the lobby like someone who normally owned every room he walked into, but right now could not remember how to walk. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dark hair going gray at the temples. The kind of man news cameras follow. He was also crying quietly, the way men cry when they have been told something they are still refusing to believe. Jace did not follow him inside. Not then. Room 412 had been quiet for 6 minutes. That was how long it had been since Dr. Aaron Fitch had removed his gloves, placed them on the tray beside the monitor, and said the words in a voice so controlled it barely moved the air. Time of death, 12:51. The baby's name was Cole Calloway, 7 months old. Admitted 3 days ago with a complication that had started small and escalated in ways that made 3 different attending physicians consult each other in low voices in the hallway. His lungs were underdeveloped. His brain activity had been reduced to a signal so faint the equipment registered it as interference rather than function. He had been on full mechanical support since Tuesday. He was not supposed to survive the week. He had not made it to the week. Grant Calloway was on his knees next to the bed. He was not making noise anymore. He had passed through the part where noise was possible and come out the other side into something quieter and worse. His hands were pressed flat on the floor. His forehead nearly touched the tile. His suit jacket had come open and he did not notice. Cole's mother had died 6 weeks after giving birth. An embolism. Sudden. Unsurvivable. Grant had buried her on a Tuesday and come back to the hospital on Wednesday because Cole was still here and Cole was what was left. Now a nurse named Brenda reached toward the ventilator panel. She was not being unkind. She was doing her job. There was a protocol. There was a next step. There was always a next step in hospitals because forward motion keeps everyone functional. Her hand was 6 inches from the panel. That was when the door opened. Nobody saw it happen. They were all looking at Cole or at the monitor or at Grant on the floor or at the panel Brenda was about to touch. Jace had pushed the door open with his shoulder because his hands were still in his jacket pockets from the cold. He was dripping water on the linoleum. He had not planned to come in here. He had followed the man in the gray suit because the man had left his car door open and Jace had thought, without thinking about it much, that someone should close it. He had taken the elevator because it was open. He had walked down the hall because the crying had stopped and something about the silence after crying is worse than the crying. He had pushed open room 412 because the number matched the floor indicator that had lit up when the man pressed the button. He was not supposed to be here. He knew that. He was already forming the sentence he would use to explain himself when he saw Cole's face. And stopped. The baby's mouth moved. A small pull at the left corner. Barely visible. Over in half a second. But Jace had watched his brother's face for 2 years. He had watched it the way you watch something you are terrified of losing. He knew what the absence of movement looked like. He knew what the pretense of absence looked like. That was not absence. His heart hit the inside of his chest so hard he felt it in his throat. "He's not gone," Jace said. The room did not respond the way rooms do when someone says something important. It responded the way rooms do when something unwanted walks in. Heads turned. Faces changed. Brenda pulled her hand back from the panel, but not because of what he said. Because of the confusion of a wet, unknown boy standing in the doorway of a private room. "Get him out," someone said. Not cruelly. Just automatically. "He moved," Jay said. Louder. "Son, you need to leave." His mouth moved. Jay stepped inside. His shoes left wet prints. "I saw it." His mouth moved. Dr. Fitch looked at him the way adults look at children who interrupt things they do not understand. Patient. Tired. Finished. "I'm sorry," Fitch said. "You need to step out." Brenda's hand went back to the panel. Jace did not make a decision. There was no moment of deliberation. His body moved before the thought completed. He crossed the room in 4 steps, went past Brenda's arm, grabbed Cole's small body off the bed with both hands, and pulled. The monitor alarm screamed. The tubes disconnected in sequence, each one making a sound. Grant Calloway's head came up from the floor. Jace was already running. He ran to the sink in the corner of the room. He had no plan. He had a memory. His mother holding his brother over the bathroom sink when he was choking on something small and swallowed wrong. The way she had tilted him. The angle. The water temperature. The gentleness that was not soft but precise. Not fast. Not rough. Just enough. Jace turned the tap. Cold, then adjusted. He held Cole the same way his mother had held Malik. Chest forward, head down, one hand supporting the spine. Let the water run over his lips. Not in. Over. Just enough. "Breathe," Jace whispered. His voice cracked on the word. "Come on. Please breathe." Security came through the door. 2 of them. One grabbed Jace's left arm. Jace did not let go of Cole. "Let go of the—" "He's still here," Jace said. Not shouting. Certain. "He's still here, let me." Cole coughed. Water ran off his lips. His chest hitched. His face scrunched in the way that means air is moving. He coughed again. And then he cried. Not a strong cry. Thin. Reedy. Like a sound a body makes when it is figuring out whether it wants to stay. But it was a cry. It was air moving through tissue and out of a mouth that 6 minutes ago a doctor had declared finished. The security guard's grip went slack. Everyone in the room froze. Dr. Fitch crossed to Jace in 3 steps and took Cole, not roughly, but with the speed of someone who has recalibrated everything in under 4 seconds. He brought him back to the bed. Nurses moved. Monitors restarted. Tubes reattached. Cole kept crying. Jace stood against the wall with his arms around himself and dripped water onto the floor and watched. Nobody looked at him. Then Grant Calloway stood up. He turned and looked at Jace the way a man looks at something he cannot categorize. Not gratitude yet. Gratitude requires understanding. This was something before understanding. Something rawer. "What did you do?" Grant said. It was not a question. Jace shook his head. "I just didn't want him to stop." Dr. Fitch pulled Grant into the hallway 10 minutes later. Jace heard parts of it through the door. Words like unexplained and response and brain activity and not consistent with the earlier readings. He heard Fitch say should not have worked 3 times. He heard the silence between each repetition. He sat in the chair in the corner and looked at Cole on the bed. Cole's eyes were closed now, but his chest moved on its own. Inconsistently but genuinely. The machines were helping. But before, the machines were doing everything. Now they were helping. That was different. A nurse named Deja brought Jace a packet of crackers and a juice box without saying anything. She set them on the chair beside him and walked back to her station. Jace opened the crackers slowly. He ate them one at a time so they would last longer. Grant came back into the room an hour later. He looked at Jace the way people look when they have prepared a sentence and are deciding whether it is enough. "Where are your parents?" he said. Jace looked at the crackers. "Gone. Family? Gone." Grant sat down in the chair across from him. He was quiet for a moment. Not uncomfortable quiet. Thinking quiet. "You can't sleep outside tonight," he said finally. Jace looked up. "It's still raining," Grant said. "You'll stay here." Jace did not answer. He had learned that answering too quickly made offers evaporate. You had to let things sit. You had to wait and see if they were real. Grant waited too. The offer did not evaporate. That night, Jace slept in a hospital chair that someone had pulled flat into a reclining position and covered with a blanket from the supply closet. It was not a bed. It was the best thing he had slept on in over a year. He woke at 3 in the morning and checked Cole's chest before he checked anything else. Still moving. He went back to sleep. The next morning, the doctors ran new scans. They stood in the hallway outside room 412 with the results and spoke in voices so low Jace could not hear them from where he sat. He watched their faces instead. Faces say more than voices anyway. Fitch looked confused. The woman beside him, whose badge said Dr. Renee Okafor, looked like someone had shown her something she was not ready to accept. The third doctor, older, kept taking his glasses off and putting them back on. Grant came back at noon. He had changed his suit. He looked more composed. He also looked like composure was a thing he was performing rather than feeling. He sat beside Jace and said, "They can't explain it." Jace said nothing. "His brain activity this morning is different from yesterday. Not normal, but different. More." Grant paused. "Dr. Fitch said he has never seen a change like this after." He stopped. "After what happened yesterday." Jace looked at Cole through the glass. "He wanted to stay," he said. Grant looked at him. "My brother didn't want to stay," Jace said. "I could tell. He was tired. He was done." He kept his voice flat. "Cole wasn't done. I could see it." Grant was quiet for a long time. "How old are you?" he said. 13. "How long have you been outside?" Jace thought about it. 14 months. Grant closed his eyes briefly, opened them. What happened? And for the first time in 14 months, Jace told someone. Not everything. Not the social worker, not the shelter intake form, not the school administrator who had stopped him once on the street and asked why he wasn't in class. But Grant Calloway sat in a hospital chair and did not move and did not interrupt and did not look away, and so Jace told him. His mother's illness. The way it had taken months, then weeks, then days. Malik's birth, which she had barely survived. The weeks after, where things had seemed possible again. Then the infection that Malik got, that the hospital said they were treating, that they said would resolve, that did not resolve. The 9 hours in the waiting room. The social worker's explanation of next steps. The door he had walked out of and not gone back through. Grant did not say anything when Jace finished. He sat with it. That was the right thing to do, and most people did not know to do it. Then he said, "You're not going back outside." Jace looked at him. "Not tonight. Not this week." Grant met his eyes. "I don't know what comes next. But not that." Jace stayed. At first it was the chair in room 412. Then a family room down the hall that the staff quietly agreed to look past. Then, 3 weeks later, when Cole was transferred to the long-term care wing and Grant had spoken to a lawyer and a social worker and a judge whose name Jace never learned, it was a room in the Calloway house on the north side of the city with a real bed and a window that faced east and caught the morning light. He did not trust it. He hid granola bars under the mattress for 2 months. Not because he thought Grant would stop feeding him. He did not know why. His hands just did it without asking his brain. He kept waiting for the condition. The thing Grant would eventually need from him in exchange. There was always a condition. Even the nurses who left sandwiches, they needed something back, even if it was just the feeling of having done something good. Nobody gave without wanting something. Grant did not ask for anything. That made Jace more suspicious, not less. But Cole was in the house now too. Brought home on a Tuesday with a team of in-home nurses and equipment that took up a full room. He was not healed. The doctors had been clear about that. He would need support for a long time. He might never develop typically. There were deficits. There were uncertainties. But he was here. And he responded to Jace. That was the word the nurses kept using. Responds. Cole would lie still and unreadable, and then Jace would walk into the room and something in Cole's face would change. Not dramatically. Slightly. Attention releasing. An eye tracking. A hand opening. Jace started talking to him. He did not know why. He started telling Cole things the way he used to tell Malik things when Malik was too young to understand but old enough to listen. About the city at night. About which streets were warm and which were cold. About the way the first light hit the hospital brickwork in winter and made it look like something worth painting. Cole watched him like those words were the most important sounds in the room. One nurse, a woman named Tony, told Grant one evening, "I don't have a clinical explanation for it, but he's better when the kid is talking." Grant watched from the doorway. He had built a company worth more than most countries. He had made decisions that moved markets. He had stood in rooms with presidents. He had not been able to make his son's hand open. A 13-year-old boy who had been sleeping against a brick wall for over a year had done it in 4 days. He stopped trying to understand it. Then the article came out. Jace had been in the house for 2 months when a journalist named whoever it was at the Tribune published a piece about Cole's case. They had gotten it from a hospital source. The piece described the incident in room 412 with enough detail that it was clearly not secondhand. It described a homeless adolescent performing an intervention that medical staff called impossible. It did not name Jace. Called him a juvenile. The internet did not need a name. Within 48 hours, the story had been shared across every platform Jace had never been on. Within a week, there were 3 competing versions of it. One said Jace had performed a medical technique he had learned from a YouTube video. One said he had prayed over the baby. One said he was a runaway from a cult who had done it as part of a ritual. None of them were true. All of them spread faster than the truth. Grant handled the press. He did not let Jace speak to anyone. He stood in front of cameras and said only that his son was alive and that his family's privacy was not negotiable, and then he went back inside. But the people who worked for him talked. And the people in Grant's circle, his board members, his advisors, the ones who had smiled at company dinners and asked after Cole's health, they began to say things too. One of them, a man named Prescott Dunn who had been Grant's closest advisor for 11 years, requested a private lunch. Jace was not there, but he heard Grant come home afterward. He had learned to read Grant's footsteps. Fast meant busy. Slow meant tired. The footsteps he heard that afternoon were something else. They were the footsteps of a man who had been handed something he did not know what to do with. Grant knocked on Jace's door. He sat down on the edge of the desk chair and did not speak for a moment. Then he said, "Prescott thinks you're a liability." Jace went still. He thinks the story has gotten too big and that having you here makes it bigger. He's concerned about— Grant paused, choosing the word carefully. He's concerned about optics. A homeless kid who appeared out of nowhere and now lives in my house. He thinks people will question my judgment. He thinks the board will. Jace looked at the window. He recommended that I find you a proper placement, Grant said. A group home, maybe a foster situation. Somewhere— He stopped again. Somewhere appropriate. Jace said nothing. He was very good at saying nothing. He had practiced it for over a year. I told him I'd think about it, Grant said. The room went cold. I told him I'd think about it, Grant repeated. Because I didn't trust myself to say what I actually wanted to say to him in that moment. Jace looked at him. Grant met his eyes. I'm not sending you anywhere. Silence. What Prescott said, Grant continued, was the most wrong thing anyone has said to me since the day a doctor told me my wife wasn't going to make it. His voice was even, controlled. The way it got when something mattered enough to be handled carefully. He treated you like a problem I have. You are not a problem I have. Jace looked back at the window. His throat was doing something he did not want it to do. Jace. I heard you, Jace said. I want to make it legal, Grant said. Not because of Cole. Not because of what happened. Because you have been through enough. And you deserve something permanent. Jace pressed the back of his hand against his mouth. He sat like that for a long time. Finally, quietly, he said, Prescott is still going to cause problems. Yes, Grant said. Your board is still going to question it. Yes. None of that went away just because you said no to him. No, Grant said. It didn't. Jace was quiet again. Then, okay. Grant waited. Okay, Jace said again. And that was all. The adoption was finalized on a Wednesday in March with 2 witnesses. A judge, and no press. Jace wore a button-down shirt that Grant had bought, and that was slightly too big at the shoulders. He signed his name on the form in handwriting that was still getting steadier. He had been in school for 4 months. He was 2 grade levels behind and catching up, which his teacher said was the fastest she had seen. He still kept granola bars under the mattress. He was working on that. Cole grew. Not quickly. Not in a straight line. There were setbacks. Weeks where numbers dropped and rooms filled with people talking fast. Nights where Jace sat on the floor outside Cole's room with his back against the wall because that was still the position where he could breathe most easily. But Cole grew. At 14 months, he learned to track movement with both eyes. At 18 months, he swallowed on his own for the first time. At 22 months, he made a sound that the speech therapist said was intentional. At 2 years old, he laughed for the first time. It was a real laugh. Short, surprised, like he had not known his face could do that. Jace was the one who made it happen. He had been making a sound with his mouth. A ridiculous sound. No real reason, just trying things, and Cole had laughed. Grant heard it from the hallway. He stood there for a moment and did not go in. Some things do not need to be entered. The doctors continued to visit. They continued to run their tests and write their notes and argue in conference rooms. The term they eventually settled on, the one that appeared in the case study that 2 of them published 3 years later, was atypical spontaneous recovery with unidentified environmental catalyst. They meant Jace. They did not name him, but that was what they meant. Jace turned 17 in April of a year that had been mostly good and partly difficult, the way most years are. It had rained all week. On Thursday afternoon, he was walking back from school along the same route he had taken every day for 3 years, and the rain came down suddenly, hard and cold, the particular weight of it like something landing on your shoulders, and the smell hit him before he could prepare. Wet concrete. Cold brick. The specific combination that meant East Loading Dock and 11 days and 38 cents in a left pocket. He stopped on the sidewalk. People moved around him. He did not move. His vision did not blur exactly. It shrank. Narrowed to a tunnel with something dark at the center of it, and his own breathing getting too loud and too fast, and his hands. Jace. He looked down. Cole was 6 now. He had been walking on his own for 8 months. He had been picked up from his afternoon program by the house aide, and they had been coming from the opposite direction, and now Cole was standing in front of Jace on the sidewalk in the rain. looking up at him with an expression that was too old for six. Cole reached up and took Jace's hand. Jace's knees gave. He went down on the wet sidewalk without meaning to, and Cole came down with him, and the aide behind Cole said something alarmed, but Cole put his other hand on Jace's face the way he had seen Grant do once when Jace was sick, and he pressed his forehead against Jace's and he stayed there. "Breathe," Cole said. His voice was still new, still figuring out how to carry the weight of words. "Breathe, Jace. Please." And Jace did. People walked past them on the sidewalk. The rain came down. Cole kept his forehead pressed to Jace's and did not move until Jace's breathing slowed and then steadied and then became normal again. They sat on the wet sidewalk for 4 minutes. Then Cole said, "Okay." Jace said, "Yeah." Cole nodded seriously, stood up, held out his hand. Jace took it. They walked home. That night, Jace sat across from Grant at the kitchen table and told him everything he had not said in 3 years. The guilt of being the one who stayed. The feeling that living was something he had stolen from the right outcome. The fear, still present even now, that one morning he would come downstairs and the house would have decided he did not belong in it. Grant listened the way he always listened. Completely. Without managing it. When Jace was finished, Grant was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You didn't find Cole because you were exceptional. You found him because you knew what it felt like to be in a room where everyone had already stopped looking." He paused. "You stayed looking. That's not a miracle. That's a choice. And it's the hardest choice there is." Jace looked at the table. "You've been making it," Grant said, "since before you ever walked through that door." Jace graduated high school on a Saturday in June and started his nursing program in September. He was not the loudest person in his cohort. He was not the most confident. He struggled with the tests that required memorization and was better with the ones that required judgment. His clinical supervisor wrote in his evaluation at the end of the first year, "Demonstrates unusual attentiveness to patient distress signals. Often identifies deterioration before monitors indicate change. Recommend for advanced placement." He worked nights. He preferred nights. Fewer people moving fast. More time to sit with someone who was afraid. He was the nurse who stayed in the room after the attending left. He was the one who knew which children wanted to be talked to and which wanted quiet and which just needed someone to sit nearby and not require anything. He was the one, on several occasions, who noticed something. He never claimed to understand it. He did not perform it. He just noticed and acted, and sometimes the outcome changed. He stopped keeping track. Cole was 12 when he asked. They were in the backyard on a Sunday evening, the light going gold the way it does at the end of summer, both of them on the steps doing nothing particular. "Do you think I'd still be here?" Cole said. "If you hadn't come in?" Jace thought about it honestly. He did not give the easy answer. "I think you wanted to stay," he said finally. "I think you were already fighting. He stopped. "I just didn't leave the room." Cole considered this. "That seems like enough," he said. Jace looked at the light going down across the yard. "Yeah," he said. "I think it is." The summer evening went on. No cameras. No one watching. Nothing louder than the wind moving through the trees and the ordinary sound of two people existing, quietly, in a world that had given them both reasons to be gone from it. They were still here. That was everything. That was, in the end, the only miracle that was ever real. Not the moment in room 412. Not the scans that made doctors go silent. Not the case study published under carefully neutral language in a journal no one outside medicine would read. Just this. Two people on a step in the evening light, still here, still choosing it. The boy the world released had refused to release the world back. And the world, without knowing it, had been held up by the hands of someone it never bothered to see.